In our world of technical wonders, the accelerating pace of innovation is ever changing how we live and work, how we think. So the future seems to be upon us before we can even process what's already happened. And the ability to adapt is crucial to survival. What has gotten us to where we are is no longer enough to keep us there. And deciphering clues to the shape of tomorrow is the key to creating the maps that will guide us there. Imagine a city reinventing itself, shedding mindsets, reversing trends, and creating new approaches toward creativity and collaboration. Building new social networks, physical spaces, and technical platforms to reposition its role in an unfolding future. That would be remarkable. Mapping that future is already underway at a place called Cortex, located in the heart of the city of St. Louis. But to think of Cortex simply as a place misses the point, because it's every bit as much a concept. To create spaces where people and ideas collide serendipitously within a community dedicated to innovation. This is the story, changing even as it is told, of Cortex. St. Louis became a major American city in the age of manufacturing. From a western trading post, it grew into a bustling river city. The power of rails and steam made it a transportation hub and center of industry. Its downtown teeming with factories and warehouses. It was a city that made things. Shoes, hats, and all kinds of apparel. It brewed beer, built automobiles, manufactured airplanes and space capsules. It attracted capital and workers who took pride in their unions, their neighborhoods, and in the industrial muscle of their city. By 1900, St. Louis was the third largest city in America. By mid-century, the same forces that were chipping away at so many of America's manufacturing centers were driving it into what seemed to many a spiral of decline as its residents moved and its factories closed. But there were reasons for hope. St. Louis was the home of respected universities, a world-class botanical garden, and a rich tradition and wide variety of cultural amenities. It was the home of an internationally acclaimed medical center, and its western edge was bordered by the largest city park in the nation. At the start of the 21st century, the city was encouraged by a successful, decades-long revitalization of its Central West End neighborhood. Its universities were producing an impressive body of plant science research that was attracting attention around the world. And if there were some way to develop that research in a way that attracted investors and businesses from across the nation, the region could possibly transition from manufacturing things to creating and exporting ideas. It could be the beginning of a new chapter in a new century.
I was thinking, what do we need to do in order to not have St. Louis companies have to go to the West Coast or the East Coast in order to get funding? And how can we grow our own here? So we looked into that. And we figured out, first of all, there was no magic bullet. You had to do a whole host of things right.
Dr. William Danforth was the retired chancellor of Washington University, who years earlier had been the driving force behind the university's medical school and hospital complex remaining in the city, redeveloping its surrounding neighborhoods. As founder of the Danforth Plant Science Center, he saw the potential of research being conducted in St. Louis to play a major role in contributing to the region's economy and enhancing its reputation as an emerging center for life science. His friend and business colleague John Dubinsky had recently retired from a career in banking and real estate.
And one day, Bill Danforth came to see me, and he said, "We're trying to revitalize St. Louis." And of course, I was of the generation that revered Bill Danforth. I mean, anything he asked me to do, I was honored. But I said to him, "Well, Bill, tell me what you want me to do exactly."
I said, "John, if I knew what I wanted you to do, I'd do it myself. You know, you need to bring together people who know more than you know." And that's what we did to start Cortex.
And what we need to do is raise some venture capital, and we need to have scientists, but we have those already. And then we need a place for these scientists to work.
We didn't have a roadmap, we didn't have a blueprint. We had an idea of where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do for St. Louis, and we were very flexible on how we would get there. So what did we do? Every time someone said, "I've done this and that," wonderful. That is terrific. And that's the way it worked.
Where all of this really got started was when Bill Danforth retired as Chancellor of Washington U in 1995. At that point, it freed up his talents, his vision, to be looking at other opportunities and challenges. And he identified that St. Louis has a real opportunity in the life sciences because it has these great research institutions, Washington U, St. Louis U. I mean, it's got Monsanto. And so he really started thinking about it in the mid-90s. By the late 90s, I mean, he had formed this coalition for plant life sciences, and out of various committees in that coalition, they started deriving various entities, in effect, one of which being Cortex. And so it all started blooming. I mean, in effect, he planted some seeds, and the seeds started to bloom.
So Cortex was not intended to be a company or an organization as such, but a network of relationships drawing from a variety of sources: individuals with ideas, academic institutions, and creative alliances focusing on the question of how the plant and life sciences could play a bigger role in the region's growth.
Well, it is about the life sciences, so yes, I mean, it's kind of like life sciences where it is a living thing. I mean, it's evolving, so I think that's a good characterization, that this whole system is kind of like a living entity.
In the mid-1980s, the Regional Commerce and Growth Association was exploring the possibility of developing a high-tech strategy for St. Louis, creating some kind of incubator, an urban research park to encourage startups. Nothing much came of it, but around 1990, J. Christopher Grace, head of the City Development Corporation, reworked the idea, and it took on new life.
He learned about the whole idea of this research park, and he picked up on it. And he wanted to make it, he called it the Technopolis. That was a name that had been given to similar endeavors in Japan and other places around the world as technology city.
Technopolis. And what he saw was, not only do you have real estate there, but you have Washington University, the Medical Center, St. Louis University, the Botanical Garden, and the St. Louis University Medical Campus. And he said in between those, there's this big piece of land that could be turned into something.
A piece of land on the southern edge of the Central West End that had seen better days. In 2000, Regional Commerce and Growth commissioned the Battelle Memorial Institute, an international science and technology think tank, to report on St. Louis's viability as a life science center.
And out of that came a conclusion. If we got our act together, Battelle said we could be tops in the world in plant science and among the tops in the world in life sciences.
The elements were all there. There was the Coalition for Plant Sciences, mobilizing major players in science and business to help startup companies. The Danforth Plant Science Center, attracting researchers from around the world. The universities and botanical garden were generating significant research, but no one had yet figured out how to harness it and apply it as an economic engine for the St. Louis region. That changed in 2002, when the Regional Commerce and Growth Association took a group of civic leaders to Boston.
The trip to Boston was part of a series of things that we did as a community to better understand our role in plant and life sciences.
So I signed up to go on this trip to Boston, and lo and behold, also on the trip were a number of wonderful people, including Bill Danforth. And this was maybe after we had started Cortex by 3 or 4 months, and we're still trying to learn how to swim. And we went to this presentation in Boston that was given by the treasurer of MIT. And he talked about what MIT had done to renovate and rejuvenate Cambridge, Massachusetts.
And we saw how MIT developed the area around it, and I saw how they funded it. I'd never figured it out before.
As of that point, had committed $600 million of its endowment money to the revitalization of the Cambridge community. Well, I looked at Bill and he looked at me, and we sort of went, wow.
I want to tell you, everybody that needed to be there turned out to be there, I think. And they were enamored. They were just blown, their socks were knocked off for what Boston was doing, and people said, well, why can't we be doing some of this, if not all of this?
Because there was not a history in St. Louis of any of the major institutions, to be honest, really reinvesting in St. Louis. But here was MIT saying they had taken $600 million of their endowment, and all of a sudden it just was like a light bulb for Bill and myself that maybe we could replicate that model in St. Louis.
Dr. Danforth walked up to me at the closing reception. So he said, when we get back to St. Louis, would you mind pulling those old plans out of the closet and briefing some people on it?
So then the question became, okay, we have this great idea, and we have all these studies, and we had put together a plan, and now it was time to test the plan and see how much realism there was. Let's get the most important people to make a decision that we can in one room at one point in time.
One evening, I received a phone call from Bill Danforth. He invited me to have breakfast with him and a group of other people the next morning. So I agreed to be there, and when I arrived, it was amazing. Every significant business leader and political leader in town was there. Bill had called them all that night when he called me, and nobody turns down Bill Danforth when he invites you to breakfast.
We had representatives from various institutions, universities. We were at BJC, meeting in an office over there.
It was like Steve Lipstein, who runs BJC. It was Father Biondi from SLU. It was Mark Wrighton from WashU. It was the head of Civic Progress. It was just kind of who's who, and they're all in the room. And Dubinsky's running the meeting, and John, I don't think the meeting lasted a half an hour.
Bill and I had a strategy, which was to explain the project, for Bill to endorse it as the visionary that he is, to indicate that I was willing to work on this, to put this plan together for up to 6 months, just to do it. But we needed some seed money to, pay office expenses and hire a few more consultants and that kind of thing.
There was a feeling that if they could put together something in the right way for these universities and medical center to work together, that there was an opportunity to create something. And we want to put together an organization that can work together, because we got a lot of 800-pound gorillas that can get together and really sit at the table and work this out, and then we need to bring in the rest of the community.
After we passed the hat, at this one meeting, we had raised $175,000. I'm not sure we ever admitted to anybody that we raised $50,000 more than we had hoped to, but we raised $175,000.
I was a new mayor. This is something very early on in my administration. And first thing I thought was, wow, this is great. All these great minds, wonderful civic leaders, individuals who are very successful in their own businesses and their discipline, pulling together to not only put together a vision, but, pretty much say, hey, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make this happen.
So this was like, from my standpoint, this was like the first bridge that was built in St. Louis to really get some of these leaders to talk and listen to each other on a joint project.
There was an idea and a spirit of cooperation, and the commitment of some very important partners, but no staff, no physical space, and no funding beyond that initial passing of the hat. The first person Dr. Danforth and John Dubinsky called on was Washington University Chancellor Mark Wrighton.
Before Mark came to Washington University in St. Louis, he was the provost at MIT. So he had lived in the Cambridge community and one way or another been part of this leadership of MIT in terms of the Cambridge community.
The Cortex Innovation Community was a vision that I felt we could realize. Such things do take time, just as the development of the Kendall Square area in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Washington University played a critical role because we were first to make a very substantial commitment to support the development of the Cortex Innovation Community.
Mark said, I'll contribute $15 million. Well, that was like putting a piece of red meat in front of a dog. I mean, one call and all of a sudden we got $15 million. So we then tried to replicate it, and with the endorsement then of Washington University, we went to talk to people at Barnes Jewish Hospital and convinced them to put in $5 million. And then we went to St. Louis University and convinced them to put in $5 million. And then we went to the University of Missouri, and in this case it was really Bill, went to talk to Blanche Toohill. Blanche liked this idea a lot.
I had a vision for UM St. Louis. We were going to make it a partner with St. Louis, and we were going to make it an excellent institution in both teaching and research, and we were going to be part and parcel of St. Louis. And I could see the city was moving to develop into more of a science technology region. I also knew that both Washington U and St. Louis U were buying property, coming together in what is now Cortex.
Then we went to the garden and talked to the garden. The garden was wildly enthusiastic, but these were times where the garden didn't have a lot of excess money. So the 5 founders really of Cortex are Washington University, St. Louis University, BJC, University of Missouri, and the garden. We asked these institutions to make an investment in Cortex. We will work as hard as we can that 20 years from now you'll get your money back plus interest. We weren't going to ask for philanthropy.
Cortex, the brain. It's an acronym. Center of Research, Technology, and Entrepreneurial Expertise. I thought, that's a mouthful, but it fits those words. Now, actually, they took it on and we used it. We changed the expertise to exchange. And even though years later, I remember at one or more board meetings saying, well, we'll use it for the time being, but we'll finally come up with a name. The name is stuck, and that's Cortex, and it dates back to 2002.
The idea had a name now, a group of dedicated partners, and over $29 million to start buying property and constructing buildings that would house new research centers and startup companies. Additional money would be raised from corporate contributions, grants, and tax credits. Attention turned once again to that tract of land on the southern edge of Midtown.
The first task of Cortex was to select the location that we were going to be in. It wasn't, God-given where it was. And we looked at 5 different locations. Bill and I both got very excited about this Midtown area. This area was pretty rough. Lots of chain link fences, a lot of signs saying no trespassing, weeds growing everywhere, broken windows, etc. One of our real scares when we started was it was thought that we found on one of the first sites an Indian burial ground, which would have stopped the project cold for at least 2 years. It turned out that it wasn't an Indian burial ground. It was just a city old burial ground. So we got over that pretty quickly. But we got very worried there for a little bit that we had come into another Cahokia Mountains.
With some money and legal powers, including the right of eminent domain, Cortex began purchasing land along the southern edge of Forest Park Boulevard. But there wasn't a single structure on the site that was ready to house a high-tech company. That became a problem when a medical startup called Stereotaxis decided it had outgrown its space in an early incubator called the Center for Emerging Technology. Because it looked as if Stereotaxis was going to follow that old familiar pattern of leaving St. Louis for greener pastures.
The company was almost had the moving vans lined up to move to San Diego. And we intervened at the stroke of midnight and were able to reach a loose understanding, not yet documented, with Stereotaxis, that if we could provide a headquarters facility for them within a certain parameter, primarily about 13 to 14 months later, that they would stay. They put up what I considered obstacles that they probably thought we couldn't achieve.
Louis Levy was a former Washington University classmate of John Dubinsky, with a record of civic involvement and decades of experience in real estate and construction.
We looked around, we talked to quickly talked to a number of sources, contractors, architects, etc., and everyone came back and said, what you're trying to do is really noble. It'll be great if you can get it, if you can do it, but it's impossible. You can't get it done. Clayco, who's known for their can-do attitude, Clayco came on pretty early and said, we'd like to try. We think we can do. And we started out to try to design, build this facility, and we worked really intensely. Their deadline was December 31st, 2005. We delivered their offices to them, I think it was December 7th, about 3 weeks early.
Louis Levy, John Dubinsky, Dr. Danforth, and others were all volunteering their time and expertise to launch this thing called Cortex. And as it expanded physically, it grew conceptually, from a strictly plant and biotech center to a space that welcomed other kinds of high-tech startups. It also grew into a major real estate development in the heart of Midtown. And beyond its physical space, it became a framework for the region's future, a bridge between the region's major scientific institutions, universities, businesses, and government, an innovation community.
Early on, people would say to me, well, what is it? What is Cortex? And I used to say, I said, Cortex is a vision, it's an initiative, it's an area, it's a building, it's a place. It can be all of that.
Cortex is an inner city space that's at the nexus of powerful knowledge organizations where space is provided for people to come together to pursue their dreams.
It does not have only one theme. We have IT companies. Boeing has an innovation center there. We have operating companies. We have a law firm. It's very diverse in terms of the nature of the organizations that have committed to space in the Cortex innovation community.
All of us in higher education and all of the big companies here, we all knew science was coming in to be a new component of the business world of St. Louis.
it's a powerful example of what we can accomplish when we combine, the public sector, the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, the for-profit and entrepreneurial sector. When they all come together, good things can happen.
I think people like myself, Bill Danforth in particular, view this as the hope and the vision for the next era of St. Louis.
In 2010, Cortex hired its first full-time president and CEO.
The critique and thinking was that we needed to pivot from seeing this as a business park where everybody had their own campus and where everything and all the activity was self-contained inside, to a more open innovation system, mixed use, trying to appeal to the lifestyle options and desires that the workforce that is increasingly populating the district wants. What is the value proposition of being in the city? And it includes the wonderful neighborhoods, great cultural districts in Grand Center with the legitimate arts, in the Forest Park area with the museums, with the recreational opportunities. All of these things really as being part of the urban value proposition, and Cortex sits right in the middle of that. Hence, we changed our name to the Cortex Innovation Community.
One way to understand Cortex is to see it as a number of distinct parts, innovation centers, each with its own background, focus, and constituency, open not only to Cortex tenants, but anyone in the region. The Center for Emerging Technology, or CET, might well be called the mother of Cortex. Developing in the 1990s under the wing of the University of Missouri-St. Louis, it was the region's first successful business incubator, nurturing the company's stereotaxis until it moved to the first Cortex building. Located in the historic Doris Motor Car Company building on Sarah Street, CET has been affiliated with Cortex since 2012.
It was actually formed by my predecessor, Blanche Toohill. We had small companies that would go in there to incubate. And with the incubation could start with faculty members with an idea from one of the universities in the area or people from the outside. And I'd say it was probably the most successful incubator in the state during that period of time.
We have over 75 companies in there at this point of all types. So we have bioscience companies, we have IT companies, we have consumer product companies, we have engineering companies, we have, just the full spectrum, the full continuum of different technologies, all within that 88,000 square feet.
They have questions about how do I put together the right team? How do I know how to price this? How do I know where to sell it? How do I know who's going to buy it? How do I test this idea in the market? How do I protect my information and my idea? How do I make the right business decisions with the right people? A lot of this is unknown territory for them, and in some cases they are experts in their field, whether they're a scientist or in other fields and endeavors, a technologist. They're not necessarily a business person per se, and so they have a lot to learn on that side.
So then we have CIC, the Cambridge Innovation Center, and the Cambridge Innovation Center was a real coup for us. About 3 to 4 years ago, we were able to recruit CIC from Kendall Square in Boston. CIC is really considered to be the world's #1 innovation center.
In 2013, CIC moved into what's called the At 4240 building on Duncan Avenue, an old telephone center from the 1920s, outfitting it for offices as small as 28 square feet to larger spaces, common areas, meeting rooms, employing architects and designers with an eye to the details that create spaces facilitating creativity and interaction.
We have almost 200 companies as we speak who rent office space from us on a month-to-month basis, and that equates to somewhere in the ballpark of 500 people. And when you put 500 people all together representing different businesses, there's just this chemistry that starts to sort of percolate, this alchemy, you could even say, that starts to develop, where the whole is far greater than the individual parts. We've created this campus environment that the community and the networking potential in this space is as valuable or more valuable than the actual sort of nuts and bolts of the office space itself.
So creating all these opportunities for what we call serendipitous collisions. Again, creating community, accelerating the interactions of innovative people, smart people, in cool places and cool spaces. And when you do that, you're much more quick to innovate and to solve problems that companies are having. And you have a variety of different perspectives that are being brought to the table. It's a real mashup.
There was a big question in our heads as to whether or not our model would work in a place like St. Louis. Once we really got under the hood and looked at the vision and the people behind Cortex and listened to folks like Dennis Lauer and John Dubinsky, the chairman of the board, learned about the roots of this organization and are sitting around the table with the chancellor of Washington University and the senior leadership at St. Louis University in UMSL. You take it very seriously very quickly. And not only were they the right people in terms of making things happen, they were also speaking our language. They were sharing the vision that we had and that we had experienced in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we are now recognized as a major hub for innovation, not only in St. Louis, but I would argue the entire Midwest region of the United States.
BioGenerator grew from the Coalition for Plant and Life Sciences, founded by Dr. Danforth and known today as BioSTL. It is comprised of the region's top university, business, civic, and philanthropic leaders committed to capitalizing on St. Louis's strengths in medical and plant sciences. Today, it is one of Cortex's most important innovation centers, offering young companies both funding and research spaces.
So the BioGenerator focuses on the biosciences, and it's an accelerator, and it has a total of about 21,000 square feet here in the district. It has shared labs with $2 or $3 million of equipment and shared office space. And at any given time, there are probably 30 companies that reside with and in the BioGenerator and share lab equipment. And investments are made by BioGenerator because it's an accelerator.
BioGenerator initially was providing seed capital for startup companies. What they found after a few years is that the companies around here weren't far enough along for seed capital. They needed even pre-seed. They needed to help them form and test out their ideas. So they came up with the idea of let's having a shared wet lab facility so that little companies didn't have to each get their own wet lab.
And so if you have a good idea and you can bring it to the BioGenerator folks and they'll evaluate it, and if they think it's worthy, you can get startup money for your company. The failure rates for startup biotech and pharmaceutical companies is very high. By working with somebody like BioGenerator, you can be very capital efficient and you can get to an answer quicker and figure out whether your idea has merit or not.
We have many great innovation centers here in Cortex. Only the BioGenerator is actually doing the hard work, though, of building companies, investing in companies, shaping the business strategy, building investment syndicates from around the country, recruiting scientific advisors, building all of the elements of a successful company and staying with that company for years. Even we've been with certain companies for a decade now and have put up to over $1 million into companies to build those companies here in St. Louis, build the roots of those companies deeply into St. Louis so they will not move as they grow.
The buildings, the labs, all the infrastructure is great, right? But when you come to work, there's so many other pieces of the puzzle that really need to be in place. So I can talk to somebody in the arts, I can talk to somebody in the engineering and the life sciences and the healthcare and the IT, and they all bring perspective, and it creates an energy that makes you want to be here. It creates an energy that makes you want to come to work every day.
And much of that energy occurs at the Venture Cafe, another innovation center located within the Cambridge Innovation Center space. Every Thursday between 3 and 8 p.m., the cafe is open to anyone who wants to meet new people and explore new avenues to innovation.
When Cortex was first created, it was created as the Cortex Innovation District, and then a few years ago, Dennis Lauer and the leadership team changed the name to the Cortex Innovation Community. And I really feel like Venture Cafe is the anchor piece in building that sense of community.
We have over 500 people that gather each week. It's a total mashup from people around the region. About 20% are new every week, so you're refreshing the pool of people. So there's always somebody new to meet when you come back.
A good example would be we had a bioscientist and a filmmaker spend 45 minutes talking just about the art of storytelling. And so what we've tried to do here is create an environment of ongoing learning where people are learning from each other. The community is learning from the community. And that's part of this new millennium of the sharing economy, right? We have things like Uber and Airbnb that are sharing resources. Well, humans are resources as well, and they can share with each other. And so we refer to the people that come together as contributors. They all have something to contribute at Venture Cafe.
We have 7 to 10 education events that are sponsored at Venture Cafe every week on unusual topics. It might be a Ferguson committee meeting here to get millennials' input into racial issues in the region. It might be the current, most recently passed intellectual property change. So people come for different reasons, but it really is the place where all of this energy and buzz, this elan vital that has really now become the hallmark of the Cortex Innovation Community.
Well, I'd say, what you get with a typical corporate environment is very strict, very tedious, and essentially what we have here in Cortex is the exact opposite, right? It's very flexible. It's very easy. There's a lot of diversity going on in the area. You never know who you're going to walk into in the corridor who are not from your company. They're doing something completely different. You can have someone in biotech talk to someone who's starting on working on a new sports company, right? That's when you get innovation, is when you get this mix of diversity of different people, different cultures, different ideas, and different experiences. Essentially, that's what we're trying to build here with Cortex, is this creative and innovation community.
Cortex is all about a live, work, play mentality. This is an urban district that's not about rolling up the sidewalks at 5 o'clock. This is an environment where people come to work and then collaborate on a lot of different business ideas and concepts, both right here in the office space, but also after hours. One of the things that makes Cortex so different is its ability to create serendipitous collisions between people from many different backgrounds. That's a very, very powerful thing that happens here.
A community not only of the young, energetic, and struggling, but one that is attracting the attention of the older and more established members of the corporate community.
So if you study chemistry, you know that reactions happen when molecules are close together and energetic. And one of the things that Cortex is doing a fantastic job of is attracting the best and brightest from various companies down here into sort of an innovation center. So DuPont is not headquartered here, but they've got an innovation center here. Monsanto, not headquartered here, but they've got a division here. And Square is here. They all send really smart, energetic, interesting people down to this area, and we run into each other.
We have Nestle Purina, we have Boeing, we have Centene, we have Express Scripts, we have MasterCard. Why are they doing that? They're doing it because they're all competing for the same talent, and that talent, a lot of that talent is right here in Cortex, and they want to shake up their corporate culture.
They are concerned that they have gotten so large that the innovation and the nimbleness, is lost. And so this aspect of taking a very large institution and having one of their teams, one of their innovation teams or their creative teams co-located with all of these startups is a very new aspect.
They want to soak in this entrepreneurial vibe that we have in Cortex, where there's so much sense of urgency to create and innovate. They want to be close to that.
Boeing, Express Scripts, Worldwide Technologies, they didn't start out as big companies. They started as small companies and grew. And so we have to create that pipeline of small companies here in St. Louis so that we can create the next generation of larger companies to support our region.
In the summer of 2016, Cortex brought in yet another center for creation and innovation in its own newly constructed building, Tech Shop, one of 9 of its kind in the nation, offering equipment and classes to an even broader community of hobbyists, tinkerers, and engineers.
We are in the midst of a revolution, a maker's revolution, where people want to be able to make what they've always been able to dream. Tech Shop has over $1 million worth of equipment, everything from 3D printing, to welding, to woodworking, to lasers, to allow you to make whatever you want to make.
And for homegrown entrepreneurs, it offers opportunities not readily available in St. Louis until now.
Entrepreneurs really want to prototype, and when I say prototype, they want to be able, before they bring an idea to fruition, be able to actually have something that you can touch and feel. So what's so exciting is our entrepreneurs here in St. Louis who have had this void of not being able to find locations where they can actually prototype will be able to have access to Tech Shop right here in the Cortex Innovation Community.
In the language of life science, it could be said that if Cortex were an organism, it has demonstrated a remarkable ability not only to adapt to its environment, but to evolve in ways that nurture and cultivate life around it. To grasp the full potential of Cortex calls for looking beyond its 200-acre campus. The plan to create places where people live, work, and play has already produced significant development in surrounding neighborhoods. A new Metrolink station is scheduled for construction, a major acknowledgement of its importance to regional growth. And though a 380,000 square foot Swedish home furnishing store might not initially be an obvious part of the plan, attracting IKEA to St. Louis was a major coup for Cortex and the city, consistent with its developing mission of being more than an urban research park.
Certainly, one of the things that was lacking in the Central West End here in St. Louis was a major retailing store, and IKEA filled that role. Secondly, IKEA is sort of, a destination. It's a sort of a legend. We figured out a way that we could attract IKEA, but on a basis that would benefit Cortex's main mission of developing science and biotechnology, etc. And the way the economics worked, a funding source for a lot of our main mission.
Yeah, we go well together because we're also a company that looks forward to the future. And the Cortex Industries District's very much about that. How do we get people to bring new initiatives to the city? Together we make a great partnership. We both have the same ambitions and we live on the back of our values.
Cortex, while they have their own distinct district, they're also a part of this greater community. One doesn't exist without the other. We're starting to see bigger interest from local developers that are interested in attracting those knowledge workers. With the growth of the medical center, we've always been able to attract development to the central portion of the Central West End. And with the growth of Cortex and with the growth of St. Louis University just to the east of us, we're seeing, former industrial areas transform into new, vibrant, mixed-use neighborhoods. And that's pretty exciting.
Are we making this up as we go? A little bit, yes, but we're really following the same methodology and thought process that our innovators and entrepreneurs use, which is to try something, see if it works, evaluate where you are, what worked, what didn't, what can we do better, and then make those changes in moving forward. We don't have a set 5-year plan of exactly what we're going to do.
And though Cortex is at the center of St. Louis's entrepreneurial explosion, the same forces driving its growth are at work in other parts of the region, creating a dynamic that helps other efforts to promote startups.
There are multiple places in the St. Louis area that are serving as incubators and support organizations for this growing movement, and I do call it a movement. T-Rex is a technology business incubator located in downtown St. Louis, and we currently house over 150 startup companies, mostly focused on technology and design. Cortex and T-Rex are different because Cortex is a whole district. It's like an entire neighborhood. T-Rex loves Cortex, and we all support one another. None of us can do this alone. We make company referrals to one another. and we all fit into a different place in the ecosystem.
OPO Startups is located in the old post office, thus OPO, on Main Street in St. Charles, offering collaboration spaces for digital startups in St. Charles County.
Having Cortex is such an important story for what's going on with the startup community in St. Louis. And you know, it puts St. Louis on the map, it puts Missouri on the map, and Cortex is really the hub of that, if you would, for the region. Where they have 200 acres or something like that. We're an old post office, an annex, and a little plaza next door. But we do see the future of this really becoming a startup district. You know, you need that hub, but you also need, you want it to grow. You know, you want to pull in more people and more talent. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about getting talent together to collaborate, to build things. And so the more resources, the more people put into that, the better.
We can have some big wins here in St. Louis. St. Louis was founded on startups. St. Louis was always an entrepreneurial city, and we're just returning to our roots in many ways.
My view of what we're doing is that we are the seed reactor, and we are creating this enormous energy that cannot be contained in 187 acres, and that has to break out and burst out, and it has to populate the different communities and municipalities that we have around us.
An example is LaunchCode, a company that's got its start at Cortex and then moved to its own site north of Del Mar in the Central West End. LaunchCode was created to meet the challenge of how to cultivate a local labor force to meet the growing needs of a high-tech economy.
LaunchCode is a talent pipeline for all the companies we're talking about. So every company in the Innovation District and all the companies in St. Louis that have computer programming needs need new programmers, and they're coming primarily from two sources, either from raiding other companies or from LaunchCode. So if the rating continues, we're just going to have people changing jobs, but we won't have any net growth. LaunchCode is all about net new. So we're bringing new talent into the ecosystem by both attracting people to the St. Louis area, but more importantly by training people in the St. Louis area to take these jobs and get working.
Every one of us in St. Louis, in the region, that are working in the technology area, every node of presence is vital for the growth of the whole region. We all have a role, and we all play a role, and we are adding to that critical mass of growing a new economy and being part of this new economy.
Yeah, so one of the great things about Square and LaunchCode is that we are really sort of cultivating local talent. And we've always had great universities in St. Louis. And as a matter of fact, we're a net exporter of smart young people, but we want to not export as many. A lot of the people that are training at LaunchCode are born and raised here, and they're now working here. And they're working for companies that are growing here. And the great thing about these jobs is that they empower other employment on top of it. So for every engineer that LaunchCode places, the statistics are that 4 other jobs will be created somewhere in the metro area. So you can take the number and multiply it almost by 5 to see the total net impact.
In the future, Cortex may not be known as Cortex. If we do our job well, people think of St. Louis as an entire innovation region, an entire St. Louis innovation community, and that would be, to me, success.
A conversation has already begun on how the influx of energy, capital, and creative energy might connect Midtown, St. Louis University, the Central West End, Washington University, and adjoining neighborhoods to create a corridor of economic prosperity.
The concept of the connectivity between the West End and downtown really didn't emerge until Cortex came together, in my mind anyway. I mean, this is really relatively pretty recent in terms of viewing the Central Corridor as a growth corridor as a concept.
But the real impact of Cortex will be measured over the long term.
I would hope this will have, over the course of the next half century, have a major impact on our economy. Based on what I see now, I am optimistic. We have not yet gotten to the point where we have companies that have become major self-sustaining companies. We still have sprouts, and we're still having to nurture those sprouts. Hopefully in another 10 years to 15 years, we will have some real plants and trees, but not in the next 5 years, probably not in the next 10 years. It's more like in the next 20 to 50 years.
There are 2,000 new apartment units under construction in the area surrounding Cortex. I actually believe that Cortex caused a lot of that. I think we've built in 12 years 1 million square feet of space. We have on the drawing boards right now that'll get built in the next 2 or 3 years at least another 300,000 square feet of space. So the thing, I think we're going to see geometric growth, and the growth will be a little bit bigger scale, a little bit taller buildings, a little bit larger buildings. The main core is to build the bioscience industry and to build jobs. Cortex is far and away the best symbol of what St. Louis can work toward becoming.
And to understand a world that will unfold in a future so many years away, it helps to listen to those most likely to inhabit it.
I absolutely do see this trend of young people leaving changing. I feel like the retention rate here in St. Louis is going to continue to increase, and I think that's in part for 2 reasons. We're providing opportunities here, business and professionally, and then we're creating a community. People come for the opportunity, but they want to stay for the community. So essentially that's what we're trying to do here within Cortex, within the whole St. Louis region.
In a space like Cortex, where events and celebrations are an integral part of community life, the Murmuration Festival was something particularly extraordinary. 3 days and nights exploring the intersections of art, music, science, and tech, served up with a heavy dose of fun.
Murmuration itself, the definition is a flock of starlings, and the geometric patterns that they make with all those individual birds coming together in a very choreographed way that people don't necessarily understand. We're doing that in the same way of bringing all of our creativity together in a weekend to celebrate what all we create when we do things as a group.
And though the process of change might only be in its earliest stages, it has begun, and the rest of the nation is starting to take notice.
I was at a conference of mayors meeting just a couple years ago, and there was a session on innovation districts. The person who was doing the presentation was showcasing 3 or 4 different cities in America where they have really successful, exciting innovation districts, and one of those cities was St. Louis. And the thing that the presenter said that really did make me smile and feel very proud of what we're doing here, he said that if any of you mayors, anybody in the country that wants to start an innovation district from scratch, you need to go to St. Louis. They did it better than anybody.
It's clear that individuals with good ideas can run with them. And what we need to provide is the infrastructure here in our community that would enable people with good ideas to start these new companies and to develop products and services that are going to bring benefit to people. If we make the investment in this infrastructure, that these new developments will take place in St. Louis, not in other cities. We think this will be important for our region, and we can become a model for the country.
And so it is not too grandiose to believe that what we're doing here will transform the region. I believe it will, not because we're great, but because this is an idea whose time has come, and there are smart people everywhere, and it's about thinking on how to connect all of the elements that are necessary together to create the environment for smart people to thrive.
An idea that the power of human imagination, nurtured in spaces designed to facilitate exploration, can transform a region's economy into a system dedicated to the production of new ideas. And from those ideas, develop new technologies and services that will transform lives across the country.
Let me just say I've been living in St. Louis now for a lot longer time. And I think if we were going to be successful, we have to do things together. That's the way we built this whole thing that ended in Cortex. We decided we would just bring together all the interested parties. We'd meet together, we got to know each other, we saw what different people were trying to do, we came to trust each other, and if you get into that story, that is an absolutely classic case of you can do things if you do them together.